Andrei Chikatilo was one of the most sadistic and prolific serial killers of the 20th century, responsible for the brutal murders of at least 52 women and children across the Soviet Union between 1978 and 1990. Known as the Butcher of Rostov, his crimes shocked not only the Soviet public but also law enforcement, which for years struggled to acknowledge, let alone confront, the reality of a serial killer operating under their nose. Chikatilo's story begins in rural Ukraine, where he was born in 1936 during the height of Stalin's famine. His early life was steeped in trauma. He grew up malnourished, isolated, and bullied. There are rumors, likely exaggerated, that his brother was kidnapped and cannibalized during the famine, a tale that Chikatilo himself would recount as part of his personal mythology. What is certain, however, is that he suffered from chronic bedwetting, social rejection, and impotence, all of which contributed to a deep and growing inner rage that would later explode into violence. Chikatilo's first known murder took place in 1978 when he lured 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova into a secluded area, attempted to rape her, and then stabbed her repeatedly in a sexual frenzy. He disposed of her body in a river. Her death was wrongly pinned on a man named Alexander Kravchenko, a previously convicted rapist who was tortured into confessing. He was executed in 1984 for a crime he didn't commit. This miscarriage of justice is one of the most chilling parts of the case because it allowed the real killer, Chikatilo, to continue his spree for another 6 years without serious interference. After a brief cooling-off period, Chikatilo resumed killing with increasing frequency and brutality. His victims ranged in age from 7 to 45, though the majority were young boys and teenage girls. Many of them were runaways, hitchhikers, or homeless youths who were lured from train and bus stations with promises of food, shelter, or work. Once he had them alone, often in forests or abandoned buildings, he attacked suddenly, stabbing his victims dozens of times. He frequently mutilated their bodies, gouged out their eyes, and in many cases sexually assaulted or cannibalized them. His killings were marked by an almost ritualistic level of violence, with injuries that often included genital mutilation, removal of nipples, and insertion of objects into the body. The investigation into the murders was plagued by confusion, political denial, and horrifying errors. At the time, the Soviet government did not want to admit that a serial killer, something they associated with the decadent West, could exist within their socialist system. This led to major delays in connecting the killings, as law enforcement failed to recognize a pattern. Dozens of innocent suspects were arrested, interrogated, and even tortured, including other known offenders and mentally ill men who were coerced into false confessions. Some of them spent years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. The number of victims continued to climb. In 1983 alone, Chikatilo murdered 17 people. In one case, he stabbed a 13-year-old boy 50 times, then castrated him and stuffed his mouth with grass. In another, he bit off the nipples of a teenage girl and carved open her abdomen. These were not just murders, they were explosions of sadistic rage that often involved sexual release, despite Chikatilo's lifelong impotence. He admitted later that stabbing and mutilating his victims was the only way he could feel aroused or fulfilled. His violence was not just physical but deeply psychological. He saw his victims as objects for his perverse gratification, and the murders became a compulsion he couldn't resist. Eventually, the sheer scale of the killings and the public panic that followed forced authorities to reevaluate their approach. A key turning point came when Soviet investigators turned to forensic psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, who created a criminal profile of the killer. Bukhanovsky described the suspect as a repressed, socially awkward man with a history of sexual dysfunction, likely in his 42nd or 52nd, with a stable job that gave him freedom to travel. The profile proved eerily accurate. In 1990, Chikatilo was spotted behaving strangely at a train station near a recent murder scene. He was observed approaching young people, pacing nervously and wiping his hands repeatedly. He was arrested after returning to the station several times over the course of a few days. Though he initially denied everything, he eventually cracked under pressure. When Dr. Bukanovsky was brought in to speak with him, Chikatilo confessed in chilling detail to 56 murders. He described how he chose his victims, what he did to them, and where the bodies were dumped. In some cases, he led police to remains they hadn't yet discovered. Chikatilo's trial in 1992 was one of the most disturbing spectacles in modern criminal history. He was kept in a steel cage inside the courtroom to protect him from the enraged families of his victims. Throughout the trial, he acted in bizarre and theatrical ways, shouting, singing, pulling down his pants, and delivering rambling monologues about Soviet corruption and sexual repression. Despite his erratic behavior, psychiatrists declared him legally sane and fit to stand trial. He was convicted of 52 counts of murder and sentenced to death. In 1994, he was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head in a Russian prison. The legacy of Andrei Chikatilo is one of horror, failure, and revelation. His crimes expose the brutal cost of a system more concerned with appearances than justice, or political ideology overruled forensic evidence, and dozens of lives could be lost while officials denied the problem even existed. But the case also pushed Soviet and later Russian law enforcement toward adopting modern profiling techniques and improving criminal investigations. Chikatilo remains a case study in both the depravity of human behavior and the dangers of institutional blindness. He wasn't just a killer. He was a product of trauma, repression, and a broken system that let him slip through the cracks until it was far too late. If you're interested in true crime, psychology, and forensic investigation, this case is essential viewing. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives into real-life criminal cases, and leave a comment with which case you'd like to see covered next. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and stay curious.